Well, hello, everyone. Hello, good evening, everyone. And Emma, thank you for that very lovely, gracious introduction. Gosh, it's good to see you again, and good to see all of you here. I'm excited for your interest and excited to get to share a little bit about my story. I want to make sure, Emma, can you give me a thumbs up? Are you guys seeing that? Okay, good. So, yeah, thank you so much, Teresa, for the invitation. And Anne, I wanted to especially thank you for your inspiration and encouragement for me to step up and share this experience with you tonight. As Emma said, I am joining you from Grand Rapids, Gajin Wajin Wiwananag, the place of the Long Rapids, which is the traditional but now colonized ancestral and contemporary lands of the Dakota and Ojibwe people. I'm really moved by the mission of the 100 Rural Women. And I was glad that Teresa, said that aloud for us today about creating connections and inspiring leadership. And I've also really, for a long time, admired and appreciated the Women's March organizers here in Minnesota. And Anne reminded us about their awesome mission to harness the power of women and their communities to create transformative social change. Women rock. They just make the world go round, and you're going to see that in this story here today. And so it's really especially, I really mean it's especially meaningful to me to be hosted tonight by these two awesome organizations, 100 Rural Women and Minnesota Women's March, working together and building bridges through connection and inspiration. And I often think about Paul Wellstone, who I thought of as sort of an honorary woman in a way. And he would say better together. And I just love this better together of 100 Rural Women reaching out and Minnesota back and forth. So there are certainly a lot of lenses that I could bring to this experience, a lot of things to say about it. An experience that I recognize I was really privileged to have. But, Emma mentioned a little bit in my bio, given my academic background and my career before coming to rural Minnesota in international security policy. Of course, I'm super interested in the role of the West, in particular the United States, in creating the conditions that brought us to this point. How did this war happen? What is our responsibility? And critiquing the international response to it. And if there's interest in that part of the story, we can certainly talk more about that in the Q&A. But given the missions of the two organizations here tonight, our two hosts, I've decided to frame the presentation here through the lens of about women as agents and women as targets. And by that, I mean, I want to seek to illustrate the disproportionate impact of Putin's invasion on women and children, as well as women's disproportionate role in addressing this humanitarian crisis that's unfolding in Ukraine. And I want to point also before we end at some ways for women and families in Minnesota to see themselves as part of this global humanitarian response to Putin's invasion. What can we do here in Minnesota? So as a woman, I'm going to begin, because we're about celebrating women and their lens. I'm going to tell you a little story about my life as a woman and how I connect to this war. So here I am. I was born in Crystal, Minnesota, northwest suburbs. Born and raised there, went to University of Minnesota, got a BA in humanities, enrolled at Columbia University in the advanced, it was then the Russian Institute. And while I was there, became the Averil Harriman Institute for Advanced Study of the Soviet Union, and did a master's thesis on international arms control policy and the role of the Soviet military and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, et cetera. So, and my joined the Foreign Service. My aspiration was to get assigned to Moscow, Russia. Well, so of course, my initial tour was to New Delhi, India. And I spent about a year there. I was evacuated out of there with a medical evacuation. I had an emergency back thing that happened. I ended up in surgery and was medically evacuated and never went back. And went on to eventually get that dream assignment in Russia. And at the end of the 80s and into the 90s, and here I am in like 1989 or something in Moscow, Russia, where I got my assignment at the embassy. I served there for about 3 or 4 years with Ambassador Jack Matlock. That's him on the third from the left, and his wife, Rebecca, that I'm standing next to on the right. I was his special assistant and also in the political section. And he was an amazing ambassador, spoke fluent Russian, and was there at the right time when really during perestroika and glasnost under Gorbachev, when Russia was opening to the West, and he was created a lot of new bridges. But quick story I want to tell about Rebecca Matlock. She was a something else, just a machine of a woman. And she hosted, I remember so well, a tea for new diplomats at Spaso House at the American Embassy in Moscow. And we were there, and I think I probably want to make a good impression on her. And so I said, oh, and tell us, Mrs. Ambassador, Mrs. Matlock, what does it take to be a successful diplomat? What are the characteristics? And she goes, the bladder of a camel. So I always loved that. Great advice is true. Throughout my career, it was true. That really helped to be a good diplomat. So anyway, so while I was in Russia on my assignment, I met and married this Russian. His name is Valery Valerievich, the father of my son Alexander. He was at the time the youngest elected member of the Moscow City Soviet, a 534-member body, legislative body of the city, and then went on during that period to be the founder of the Liberal Party of Russia. This is when the Supreme, that's him in front there, when the Communist Party, when other parties appeared, he was involved in starting the Liberal Party there. And so we met and married, and our son, Alexander, was born. I gave birth to him in Russian hospital in Russian. I don't recommend doing that in a foreign language. Then we came, when Alex was about 2, we came back to Minnesota, and I was going to say that when he was born the week that the ruble crashed in August of 1998, the Russian financial crisis, when the Russian government and the central bank devalued the ruble and defaulted on all the debt. And his father, Valery, lost all his life savings, as did most of Russia. So anyway, we ended up, and I found my way to Minnesota. I enrolled at the University of Minnesota's new Masters of Public Affairs course, and found my way to Grand Rapids, Minnesota, to the work at the Blandin Foundation. And it was here in Grand Rapids that I met who was going to become my second husband, Dennis Goychuk, who was born in Kiev, of Russian father and a Ukrainian mother, bilingual, so Ukrainian Russian. And he's since become a US citizen, and we're married, and here we are, fast forward 24 years, February 24th, Putin announces a special operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. Dennis and I are sitting in our living room. His parents are in Kiev. This is his mom and dad, Olga and Anatoly, and his cousin. My son Alex is now 23, and he's on a beach somewhere in Hollywood, somewhere. I've lost track of him. I don't know where he is. I'm worried sick about him. And Alex's dad, Valery, is still in Moscow and still working as the special staff for the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Russian Council or the Federal Council of the Federal Assembly. So works for the federal legislature in Russia as the Foreign Affairs Committee staff. So he's still there. And that's what as I'm thinking about all those people, as I'm sitting in my living room, listening to Putin announce, first he said, I'm forced, by the oppression of the Russian speakers in Eastern Ukraine. I have no choice after 7 years of war in Ukraine, but to recognize the People's Republic of Lugansk and Donetsk. And I knew it was coming, the next sentence, and he goes, and to protect them, as I speak, I'm announcing the special operation. So it was happening. And for the first 2 weeks of the war, it just consumed our lives. I couldn't think of anything else. Dennis's parents are under attack. You may remember the beginning of the war, and their whole story of evacuation and going and coming is a whole nother story. But one morning, in my inbox comes this email from a friend of mine who forwarded from this organization called The Joint, the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. I had never heard of this organization. It says has this fascinating history. It's really the beginning, the first global humanitarian organization, as you can see here, was created in response to Jews that were stranded in then Ottoman-controlled Palestine in the turn of the last century. And that organization, the Joint GDC, is still at work today, collecting and sending people and interceding and helping Jews mostly, but also other people to escape war. And so this came into my inbox. It's like, we're looking for volunteers to go over there. And I had never imagined myself in this. You can see all my connections to that part of the world. I'd never imagined myself doing anything about it, really, or going there. But suddenly here was this opportunity. And I clicked on the link, you know, it was a short application. And it said, what languages do you speak? And I was all puffed up. Well, I speak Russian, you know, like, oh, awesome, me, you know, that's so cool. But then there was the list of like 8 languages, like, what about Ukrainian, Polish, French, German? So I kind of felt put in my place. And then the next question was, and what skills do you have? You know, and I'm like, it was like, can you drive a bus? You know, put up an internet connection. Are you a teacher, a doctor, a nurse? Can you write a prescription? You know, not so much, you know. So anyway, I thought, what the heck? I pushed send. And the next morning, the phone rings. And they called me up. And they said, it was Thursday morning. And they said, can you leave on Tuesday? And because I had a passport, so here's my big takeaway, women. Have your passport ready to go in your drawer. I had my vaccine, I had a passport, and it was Thursday. And on Tuesday, I was able, thanks to my work colleagues, my mates, stepped up and I could leave. And my husband said yes. And I was on a plane to Warsaw. The thing about this crisis is that it is a story of women and children, right? 90% of the evacuees are women and children. I was gonna, hold on just a second. Want to make sure oh yeah, I wanted to add this, that so as of late April, and that these numbers are not fresh, it's already May now, but as of late April, there were 5.1 million refugees had left Ukraine. 5 million of them were in Poland. So the overwhelming majority of these refugees are in Poland. And on top of that, over a quarter of the population of Ukraine had been displaced internally. 7 million people, over 1 in 4 have been displaced. 5 million had left the country. 90% of them are women. And of course, the war had severely impacted social cohesion, community security, and the resilience of local communities all across Ukraine. And not knowing how thorough it was, that so many different communities. The lack of access to social services included, you know, schools and strained community resources, really has increased the care burden of women who are responsible for care of children and elderly family members. Women and girls are uniquely exposed to gender-specific risks, such as, you know, denial of access to essential services and goods, trafficking, of course, sexual and gender-based violence, including rape. Reports have emerged since February 24th of the start of the war, suggest that rape in Ukraine at the hands of Russian soldiers may be widespread. Ukraine's prosecutor general has accused Russia of using rape as a, quote, deliberate strategy of war. We've had these accounts from Bucha, that suburb northwest of Ukraine, of Kiev, not far from where Dennis's parents live. Basements in Irpin, gunpoint in the village east of Kiev, lots of stories. Some survivors have said that the Russian forces have told them that they'd be ostracized and unable to have more Ukrainian children because of the result. That was their intention, the use of rape as an instrument of war. And there have been some reports that men and boys too have been targeted. Russia has denied these allegations. and in fact has turned the tables, accusing Russian soldiers of staging the scenes for propaganda purposes. My husband, Valery, my first husband, who you recall works for the Russian government, federal government there, has sent me links on his Telegram posts. You guys may have heard Telegram is a social media platform that's widely used in Russia, and you'll often hear about it referenced in media accounts. We talk because it's a way that messaging is shared. He has sent me Telegram posts allegedly from a resident of Bucha that is saying that the perpetrators were Ukrainian soldiers. And I've seen other, social media posts. It's just widely circulated, widely believed in those social media that this is all propaganda perpetrated to make Russia look bad. So as incredible as it sounds to us, but you have to remember, think of all the people in this country that buy incredible stories about political narratives here too. So before we, throw stones. So I want to be sure to point out to this wonderful, amazing women audience of activists that are thinking about transformative change in the world, that rape as a strategy of war is prohibited by international human rights law. That's, that has been achieved. In 2008, the UN Security Council passed a resolution reaffirming that, quote, rape and other forms of sexual violence can constitute a war crime, a crime against humanity, or a constitutive act with respect to genocide. So according to psychologists who treat survivors of gender-based violence in conflict zones, part of the reason rape as a weapon is so powerful and why it's used intentionally to fracture societies is that survivors have a hard time being reintegrated into their communities. And this is such a tragedy to me. Not only the violence, but the difficulty of reintegrating into their communities. Think about the stories we've heard about the women who were forcibly taken as wives by the Taliban and the difficulty they've had being reintegrated into their communities. And think about, and I'm going to talk later about the World War II and the Jewish experience, but one of the most just heart-stopping, just heartbreaking stories I heard about the Holocaust was that the survivors who went back to their village and people's response was, and what are you doing here? We thought all the Jews were dead. So the difficulty of reintegrating into their society, that's why they are not accepted back. So efforts are underway to gather evidence of possible war crimes that could be used in an international criminal court. The UN under Patton's leadership is demanding a gender intentional response to the war to ensure that specific rights and needs of women and girls are prioritized. Pamela Patton's appointment here as special representative is her charge is to work to end rape as an instrument of war. It's not clear yet in Ukraine. Our media is so messed up. It's hard to know what to believe, but it's my impression that it is not yet clear how systematic the sexual violence has been, nor whether the attacks by troops involved orders from more senior commanders. And I am certainly prepared to believe that Ukrainian soldiers are also committing acts of war and violence. I think we need to avoid the rush to demonize that makes it so easy to hate. But Special Representative Patton is leading effort now with the Ukrainian government. They've just began coordinating an effort to gather evidence about possible criminal proceedings. I think you may have heard in the news they've begun some criminal proceedings in Ukraine already. But it is clear that the conflict does exacerbate the vulnerability of women and girls to trafficking, and that this is could be and will be a dangerous byproduct of this conflict-fueled refugee crisis. One of the strategies that they're using in Ukraine and in Eastern Europe is to establish hubs in communities, safe places, kind of where people could report cases of sexual violence and receive some kind of support. So some of the global humanitarian response is trying to set up resources like that. And another strategy, of course, is to lean into mental and psychological supportive services for women and children. And this is where I'm going to pivot my story and talk a little bit about the context. So I talked about the numbers, 1.25 displaced, 5 million in Poland. But let's bear in mind compared to what, as my dad would always say. So it's a drop in the bucket. Look at this. Ukraine, 5 million. 274 million people across the globe are going to need humanitarian assistance this year. And a lot of them are not from Europe. So there is a deep, I think, racial lens that needs to be brought to our response. And understand that Afghanistan refugees facing a war that we made, you break it, you own it, were, forcibly turned away from the Belarusian border. And a lot of, I think, why we're seeing such riveted attention in our media is because they look like us. So I flew to Warsaw to the offices of the Joint Distribution Committee there with, this is another volunteer, Anna from San Diego. And then we went from there to the board. I wanted to give you just kind of a quick sense of where we're talking here. Can you see my cursor? Teresa, yes, you can see my cursor. So it's kind of here. Lviv is up here, which is, the Western city. This Lviv used to be a capital of Poland. Who knew? I learned so much about Eastern European history, like Poland was just like shoved west after the war and disappeared off the map completely. And it's just like, Poland is just, these are fields of blood here, of just endless strife. So anyway, Lviv here, we were down here in this kind of corner. Here's another map. You can see that we were at the evacuee center here in Korcwoza, and the borders that we're going to show pictures of is down here in Medica. And so here's Lviv, we're down here. So just to give you kind of a little bit of orientation of the site. And I talked about how this is a crisis of women and children. And at the time when I came to the center was about week 4 of the war. And the week just previous to that, this center had been receiving 5,000 evacuees a day. When I got there, it was 500 a day. It still felt overwhelming because each of these families has their own story. Each of them has fled under some horrible circumstance or other. And some of them right from the street, never went home. Some people had suitcases. Some people had, just plastic bags. One woman, just especially heartrending story that she's an older woman. She was really ebullient, but kind of, I don't know if she was in shock, but not fully appropriate to the situation. She was sharing out loud that tomorrow was her 81st birthday. She's going to be 81 tomorrow. So I kind of went up to her and asked her. We had sort of a routine as we would accept these people coming over the border. The first question we'd ask them was, do you have someone to meet you here in the West? Do you have someone that can take you in? And she said, yes, my daughter, but I don't know where she is. I don't have her phone number. So one of the fun things about the broadband work is that it's so affirmed the importance of broadband, because the first, what the most important thing is? A phone. You know what people lined up to get the first thing when they get off the bus? A SIM card. Who would have thunk that? They stood in line for SIM cards because until you get the SIM card in your phone, you were dead in the water. And anything you wanted to do or meet or talk about, you needed a phone, you needed connectivity. And that was your number one need. So anyway, so she doesn't have, or a phone number, right? Someone to call. But in this case, she didn't have the phone number of her daughter. And she has one little plastic bag, like grocery bag. And I see in the bag she's holding up, she has a wad of cash like this. And she tells me that she's taken all her life savings out of her bank the day before to bring to her daughter. She's not sure where her daughter is. Another woman told me that she had to stay behind to care for her elderly mother who was dying. and her ex-husband wanted to leave with their 2 sons and said, give me permission. They were in a contentious divorce, I guess still divorcing, contentious divorce. I want to take the sons out of the mortal danger. She couldn't leave her mother, so she signed the papers reluctantly. Her mother died 2 weeks later. She crossed the border, and now her husband won't contact her. So just every story, and just the families and the heartbreak is just endless. And how these people got to the border. Some of them drove here, and this sign here, those of you who read Russian or Cyrillic, says "Дети," children. So he put signs in the windows to tell other people that there's kids in this car, please don't shoot. So this is some photographs from this evacuee center in town, and I got a kick out of this one here in the middle. We Americans get blamed a lot for being so geographically illiterate. Well, it turns out Ukrainians, even though their neighbors aren't that smart about Polish maps either. And so here's a map that says you are here, here's Poland, and here are the names of all these other cities that are going to welcome you, or where you could go from where you are right now. Up here it says Ukraine plus Poland equals love. And down here it says Fu-fu, Russia, Fu-fu to Russia. And here, of course, is a breastfeeding room. And these are the cots that over on the left that are opened up where people sleep. They come in, they get their SIM card. Do you have someone to meet? And if you do, then it's just like, well, how do you get from here to there? And if you don't have somebody to meet, then the second question is, how long do you expect to be an evacuee, basically? Are you going back? Do you aspire to return home? Or is this it? Are you here for good? Or how long are you planning to stay here? For how long? And that would really determine what their options were. But as I said, Poland, as you saw, Poland was full, as I said, 5 million people in Poland. And incidentally, my husband, Valery, who's channeling the Russian point of view on this, says that these emigres, these evacuees, are Putin's secret weapon. That 6 months from now, Europe is going to be sick of these emigres and evacuees. And America is going to be sick of paying higher gas prices. And so it's all a ticking time bomb. But here on the right, you can see it's kind of like a fair, like come to our country. This is the Czech Republic receiving, these people are standing in line here on the left. Where could we go? Well, in the Czech Republic, you could come to us, and they would go up there and hear their pitch. So the Danes were there, the Swedes, the Finns, the Germans, the British, and not the Americans, not so much. I'll talk about that more in a bit. Here's some scenes from the center. You see those cots and lots of blankets and pillows and lots of stuffed animals. It's interesting how much comfort people seem to get, both kids and grown-ups. And there was just boxes and boxes of supplies. I felt foolish. I brought some supplies with me in my backpack, some gum and chocolate and stuff. And there's just overwhelming supplies. Some people like me came with a group. They waited for an email opportunity for life to itself to show, as they say in Russian. Some people just showed up. This thing here on the right is a little tent staffed by a guy who just came. He woke up. He didn't have any connection to this part of the world. He's from Denver. He's all tatted up, he and his girlfriend. They woke up one day, heard the news, went to the airport, bought an airplane ticket, flew to Warsaw, rented a car, drove to the border, and there they are, offering tea, soup, cooking. And there are people like that from Australia, London, all over, just showed up. However, there's kind of a downside to being a volunteer like that, because there's a danger of disaster tourism, if you know what I mean. That people suck up the resources that they're, instead of the resources being available for the evacuees, that the volunteers there are sleeping in the beds and eating the food. But anyway, there's a fine, and I worried about that myself. I mean, I feel that I certainly got a lot more out of this experience than I gave. And I was always careful about trying to bring value, but here's how one guy tried to. So here's a little sign. And then over here is, just, it was just the center of so much, kind of like a global humanitarian complex. I did want to give a shout out to World Central Kitchen. If you guys have ever run across them, they're an amazing outfit. You know, there's a number of these. There's Librarians Without Borders, who I saw there. They had an amazing art box kit. Doctors Without Borders, of course, were there. And I guess you could, these guys are kind of like Chefs Without Borders, World Central Kitchen. And they're all over Eastern Europe in war zones, at least in Europe. And crews just showing up at the kitchen every day. We made, the day I was there with this crew, we made 600 sandwiches, 600 salads, 600 soups, and people from all over rocking to hip hop music and not really speaking each other languages. But look at this amazing food they had. That it was like with love. It was all this gorgeous produce, beautiful buns, beautiful greenery, and look at these onions, and the salads had little seeds and homemade dressing. It was just like an act of love. It was absolute joy. And we'd wrap each of these individually, put 50 in a bin, and then there was this whole other amazing system. People showing up with cars, and it'd be driven all across, to train stations and bus stations to feed people across Europe. These are some pictures from the border itself, Medica there. This is the actual border itself. And so there's sort of on the right here, you can see it's sort of a no man's land. They would leave Ukraine, walk across this football field, and kind of come through these gates, and rolling their suitcases or carrying their bags. There was also you had to get off your bus on that side and walk across. So people just meeting people as they come over the border, and it would have this sort of all comers were here to help fair almost feeling. Those of you who read Cyrillic, you can see these are French folks. It says French help, and they'd go through those gates and just walk down this sidewalk, and there would be people standing there handing out food, drink, warming tents, blankets, shoes, maps, connections. And just like in so many of our systems, everybody needs a navigator. They get from here to here. I talked at the top about the fear of trafficking and abuse. There's a lot of care and attention and awareness to trying to help make people aware of how to be safe. That's Russian there on the right, and they had it in Polish as well, and Ukrainian. These rules, these guidelines. Maybe some of you saw the heartbreaking news of mothers writing their phone numbers and names on their children's bodies. So same idea here, like if we're separated, if we die. So it's a time of real vulnerability for women and children, for sure. This is me and my friend Marina she's from Vancouver, at the border there, with our proudly sporting our JDC jackets. That's how people could identify us. And our job would be to meet people and help them, ask them those two questions. Do you have someone here, and how long are you here for? And then we would direct them on. One night we went to the border to meet actual, get this, Holocaust survivors. So what a heartbreak. People who had been evacuated and survived the Holocaust are again being evacuated from their towns. This one old man says to me, I'm 88 years old and I'm being evacuated under attack, and I was 8 years old the last time this happened to me. And you can see that this woman here is among those evacuees, and how they felt, these Jews who survived the German concentration camps, about being loaded onto a German Red Cross bus and taken to Berlin for medical treatment. I don't know. But they didn't speak. So what we got, my job here was to just interpret, because nobody spoke anybody's language except Russian was the intermediate language. So I was able to help them, like get their blood pressure, their medicine, answer any questions. Because they're going to strap down in this ambulance bus for an 8-hour drive to Berlin. Right there at the border at Medica, they also had these warming tents. It was cold the first several, month or several weeks of the war. And these warming tents were thrown up, and you can see again all this aid here, all these supplies, soup. There was a corner here with an Orthodox priest in it, in this warming tent at the border. And here is my team and I, again, helping evacuee get in get in a van, and he's going to be driven west, and then he's going on to Israel. Here's our team with the Holocaust survivor on his way to Israel. So when time come to, and I just want to end with a little context for me, and sort of part of my big, huge takeaway in learning about this was a little bit about the war and history. So I was born in 1956, and this building here on the left was built in 1954. It's the Palace of Culture and Science, and in Warsaw. And those of you who've been to Eastern Europe may recognize this is typical Stalinist architecture, modeled after the famous Seven Sisters in Moscow that were built by Stalin in the 30s. In fact, Valery, Alex's dad, lives in one of those Kotelnicheskaya Naberezhny, one of those Seven Sisters. And you can see it today on the right, the new Warsaw and the old Warsaw. And part of my big takeaway was how recent this horrible war was, World War II. It wasn't that long ago, and the same players kind of on a shuffled chessboard is just so, and all the tragic deaths. So here it is again today. Sort of the old Warsaw was a city that was devastated at the end of the war by the Red Army, as the Soviets stood by and watched, and the West tied its hands. And anyway, so it was built on bones and ash. Today, there's a lot of love being shown for Ukraine in Europe and in Poland. You guys probably know that the Polish flag is red and white, but the yellow and red here is Warsaw, and Warsaw loves Ukraine. And just everywhere you went, you saw signs of, support. But again, I do think that the fatigue will set in, and there will be resentment and a displacement, and that's going to be a whole nother challenge. So as I said, Warsaw is just it's this blood-drenched earth. And right here in downtown Warsaw, this is the flame of the eternal flame. Right there in the heart of town, these guys are there 24 hours. Here's this main plaza, and the Warsaw was 90% of it was bombed to the ground, and then it was rebuilt brick by brick. You can see a little bit of old and new there. As I was walking to the old town, I walked through this park, and there were these children with bubbles. And it was just so beautiful and sort of hopeful, and children always. And the old town of, again, Warsaw was bombed, completely devastated. This is all all rebuilt, and which is just eerie and creepy in all kinds of ways. On the right, I want you to notice that mermaid. So I'll tell you a quick story about mermaids here in a minute. Mermaid is the symbol of Warsaw. It was Lent, it was the week before Easter, very Catholic nation, of course. And so I was super struck by all of the churches, all of them rebuilt. And this gorgeous veil here over Christ in the week before Easter. And I love amber, of course, and being from Russia, and there was just so much of it all around. And the city was festooned out. So here's the mermaid again. This is the symbol of Warsaw and downtown Warsaw, old Warsaw. And I did go to a real history buff, and I love going to local history museums every chance I get. And the one here in Warsaw is, of course, just heartbreaking because of what this town has endured. But I wanted to share with you, as fellow Minnesotans here in northern Minnesota, kind of a sense of the history of humanity as it stretches across time in Europe. So here's our mermaid in the old town. And this emblem has been around since, this was the first in 1495, see down here, the first when they found this symbol of Warsaw. And through time, just going to show you how it's evolved here. And then at the entrance to the museum, they had this. So just a sense kind of the enduring place and the relationship of people to that place. So inside that museum was this exhibit here. And it gives you a visceral sense of the this is all of Warsaw is like this. This on the left, and then today, what they've rebuilt the whole town. But what's really devastating is the ghetto. And this exhibit. So I've done a lot of reading since, and this purple triangle here means this was a political prisoner. This was not a Jew. This is a political prisoner. But the ghetto uprising and then the Warsaw uprising was just how people could stand outside that wall and see it burn and hear it burn. And then anyway, in that museum is this painting, and you know, for over decades they clean those. So from that rubble of those bricks, they, you know, have to clean those bricks off, pile those bricks up, and they rebuilt that city on bone and ash. Here's a view of the old town square and the new Warsaw in the distance. And so here is the wall of the ghetto. And this is the dates of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, about which I knew very little, and except that it was they brought Jews there from all over Europe, and it was a full third of the city. And the density was it was just a killing field. So very and I just couldn't imagine living today. You know, what does it mean to carry memory? How do you honor this? Here it is. So here's a picture. This is the ghetto, and you know, you can see how huge it was in Warsaw. 9 people to a small room. Everybody died. I mean, it was just horrible. And the thing too that I was really struck by in my trip to Eastern Europe was again, how we just get one narrow view of history. So I grew up, when I studied World War II history, we all knew about, you guys recognize this photograph, right? Teresa, I'm looking at you. This is the Allies liberated Paris. And that same month, this is the Polish resistance that was abandoned by the West as the Red Army stood on the other side of the Vistula, and we let them and let that city go. And then when the Germans finally retreated, Hitler ordered it bombed. And so we abandoned Poland to the Soviets. All of that was there, very present for me in that frame, that echo of this new war, and the Germans and the Poles and the Jews and the Russians, and they're all still at it. Meanwhile, our government is sending more arms and arming, and that is not the answer, in my opinion. This is the view outside my hotel window in Warsaw. So I wanted to give us some context as we think about our role and what we can do, and role of women and what needs to change. So see this here. So it's just a quirk of American, how it works. So the president himself or herself gets to set the number of refugees. It's that way in the law. The president gets to set. And so Trump, when he was president, had reduced it to 15,000 was the total number, you guys, of refugees that we as a nation were going to receive. And in 2021, when Biden was elected, then he upped that to 62,500, but we were only able to resettle 11,000. So, you know, not even 20% of the new goal. And now we have this new goal. You heard us say that we're going to take 125,000 Afghans and up to 100,000 Ukrainians. But how we're going to do it is, again, under Trump, the whole infrastructure was eviscerated. And so this new policy, Uniting for Ukraine, humanitarian parole, it is a simplification of the previous policy, because it gives rights to live and work for up to 2 years. But the hosts, you and I, have to sign a financial statement that we will be financially responsible for these families for up to 2 years. So again, it's another example of the privatization of the role of government. Something that government is supposed to do for us because it's the right thing to do, it's in our national interest, is now I'm going to show you the link here. You can sign up and say that you'll host, but you're on your own. Alight is formerly the American Rescue Committee. We're home to Alight here in Minnesota. Their offices are in Minneapolis. It's their website, and they are on the ground in Ukraine. It's a very near place to connect. They're accepting donations, and I heard from them yesterday, because the needs are so dynamic that it's really cash donations. You know, that's really what they need is money. They're on the ground. They're doing amazing intervention work, including, and I wanted to call this out to this cool audience, this program. It's called Aid to Art. And it's what a neat opportunity for us to help as women here in Minnesota. These are, this is aid going to Ukrainian artists and designers. And they get some cash aid and then also some, you know, marketing of their art to share messages and stuff. So I just encourage you to, if you want to learn more about local, you know, Minnesota-based leader in global humanitarian aid, Alight, I really recommend this program. And then here is the link to the Department of Homeland Security website. If they're keeping a tally, if you want to go on there and, you know, register that you're ready and willing to accept refugees in your home, that's how you do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Emma. Happy to have any kind of conversation people want, and let me stop sharing here.